Hello, welcome to this video from PreludeDriver.com on how to replace the coolant in a 1991 Honda Prelude, but this procedure really works fine for any of the third generation Honda Preludes, so anything 1988 through 1991. I'll be doing it on a 2.1 liter 1991, so with the V21A1 engine. Procedure's exactly the same for the V20A5. So I'll be going through the drain, the flush, and then a refill of the radiator, and then also to bleed the coolant out so that you get all the air out of the system. It doesn't take much work. You'll really only need, just some very basic tools, just a wrench to do the bleed, and then of course you'll need some fresh coolant because if you're going to drain the radiator, you probably want to replace that coolant with some fresh stuff. And so I'll show you the coolant that I use when we get to that point, but I'll say up front that if you're going to go out and do some shopping, I always recommend going right to Honda and getting the coolant that they intended to be put in this engine. A lot of the stuff that you find on the shelves these days is has additives in it, maybe for rust inhibitors or something else, and in the manual and on the underside of the hood you'll often find a sticker too that talks about how the engine is really designed not to have some of those things in it. So if you go right to Honda, you get the right kind for sure. Otherwise, just read really carefully at your local auto parts store and make sure you're getting something that's a pretty pure mix. Honda, the one that this car would use, I believe Honda refers to it as Type 1, but I mean if you just talk to the parts clerk, they'll be able to use the computer to look up the right stuff. Honda antifreeze and coolant is a little bit more expensive than a lot of the stuff that you'll find in the auto parts stores, but I think for the frequency that you change it out, which doesn't happen that often, it's I think money well spent to get something that's right, designed properly for the engine. So I'll go through it step by step, and thanks for watching. To drain the radiator, we just have to use the drain spout that's on the bottom. It's actually exactly in the middle of the car, and it's pretty easy to find. It'll usually have a white spindle on it that you can just turn, and then put a bucket underneath, collect the old coolant out of the engine, and then probably it's always a good idea to make sure that you dispose of it properly. Don't do something like pour it into the street or something like that, because it tastes sweet and animals like to drink it and it's really poisonous to them. So just put it in a bucket and then put it in an old jug or something like that and take it to your chemical depot. So just turn the knob to the left. The coolant will drain. If you pop the cap off the top, it'll come out. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to drain the coolant out of the block. This is quite a bit trickier than just draining the radiator. If you just want to replace the coolant in your radiator, that takes care of a good portion of it. But to really get all of it, you have to drain the stuff out of the block as well. So I'll just show you what I've done to do that. You'll notice that I've just unbolted and pulled the exhaust heat shield back a little bit to give myself some space. And I've also pulled off the radiator side of the upper rad hose, just so that I have some more place to work. And you can see I've got a wrench with 2 extensions on it, and the drain plug for the block coolant is just down in behind there. You can see my 17mm socket on it. The bolt head of that plug is quite long, so it's kind of easy to identify. You can kind of see where it is, just kind of right underneath and down a little bit from where the exhaust manifold mounts to the head. And that plug is basically in the bottom or in the lower section of the water jacket. So if we pull it out, and you just kind of have to guess where it's going to drain at the bottom, so use a big drain pan below. So I'm going to pull it out and drain the fluid from the block. Okay, the last remaining bit of coolant, if you really want to get it all, it will be in the reservoir. So what I've done to get that out is, you can see I've disconnected the reservoir hose from where the radiator cap goes, and then I've just looped it out of its stays and fed it down through to the bottom of the car and into my catch bucket. And when you do that, take the lid off the top of the reservoir fill neck, and a lot of it will drain out, just siphon out of there. And then you can also just apply some air pressure from an air compressor or something like that, and you'll force the rest of it out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flush the radiator out with some clean water. So I've reopened the spout in the bottom of the radiator, put my catch bucket down there, and I've filled some jugs with clean water. You could use a garden hose if that's easier, but I don't have a hose long enough to get to my garage, so I just use jugs. And the idea is just to run water through the radiator until you see it running clear out the bottom. That's just to get all the sediment and stuff that's clinging to the sides of the radiator walls. So the fluid is running clear now, and so now I'm going to close the radiator spout in the bottom. I'm going to rethread the reservoir hose back up and reconnect it. I'm going to replace the block coolant plug and put my exhaust heat shield back on and put the upper rad hose back on. And then the system is ready for new coolant to be added. The coolant that I use is right from Honda. I believe they call it Type 1. A lot of the coolants that are available at the auto parts shops and things like that, or off the shelf at your local hardware store, often include a lot of chemicals for inhibiting rust and things like that. Honda suggests that those type of products actually not be used in these cars because they have all aluminum blocks, and a lot of the components are aluminum as well, and so a lot of the rust inhibitive chemical isn't actually required, and can just end up gooing things up instead. That's not to say that any antifreeze probably wouldn't be okay, it's just I tend to go with what Honda recommends to keep the engine in as good a condition as I can. So I went to Honda and got coolant from them. They call it Type 1, and it's just a plain antifreeze coolant with very little rust inhibitors in it, and they've mixed it specifically for aluminum blocks. It doesn't come pre-mixed, so I will have to mix it. The way that you mix the coolant really depends on your climate more than anything, but for 95% of the applications, a 50-50 mix with water will give you what you need. I'm actually going to mix mine 60-40 coolant to water because I live in a particularly cold place and it does get below -40°C here quite often in the winter, and I don't want to run the risk of my block freezing up. You can use water from the tap when you're mixing with antifreeze, but it's definitely better to mix with distilled water. So that's not spring water or mineral water that you get at the grocery store, but actual distilled water that has no mineral content in it. The reason is that the water from your tap or mineral water or spring water that you might get at a grocery store in a jug will have minerals in it, and those will probably end up just accumulating on the inside of your water lines in the engine, and better to keep those clear. Distilled water is easy to find. I've had the most luck finding it actually at pharmacies, where you can usually buy it in a big gallon jug for, a few bucks. So I think it's money well spent to maintain the engine in good shape. Before I put the coolant in, I'm going to first put my splash guard back on and then lower the car back down so that it's on level ground when we do the fill procedure. Alright, to refill the radiator and the block with coolant, the procedure is pretty simple. The first thing that you need to do is go inside the car and set the heat control position all the way to hot. And then the next thing we're going to do is just go down here on the thermostat housing and with a 12mm wrench open up the bleed bolt, and that will allow us to see when the coolant has gone into that section of the block. So just open it enough that coolant will come out. You don't have to take it right out. Now what we're going to do is we're going to begin to fill the radiator up. Obviously that's pretty simple, but what we're going to be watching for is we're going to be watching for coolant to start flowing out of the bleed bolt that we loosened. And we're going to keep filling the radiator. When we see coolant running out of the bleed bolt, we're going to close it and tighten it up, and then we're going to keep filling the radiator until the fluid level comes up to the bottom of the filler neck. At that point, we'll start the car and we'll let it run until it warms up, or until the fan comes on twice, and then we add more coolant to bring the level back up to the bottom of the filler neck of the radiator. And as we do that, we're watching for leaks. As you fill, take what steps are necessary to prevent coolant from spilling on your paint, because it will wreck your paint. It's corrosive. Remember, you want to be using mixed coolant. So you can't put coolant in straight, it needs to be mixed with water. So as you fill, just watch that bleed bolt. And there, as you can see, there's coolant coming out of the bleed bolt, so we can close it. And just gently snug it up with your wrench. Then make sure the radiator's filled to the bottom of the filler neck, and then start the car and let it warm up until the fan comes on twice, and then add any coolant that you need to bring it back up to the bottom of the filler neck, and close the radiator. After you've run the car up to the point that it's warm, Just double check that you don't need to add any more coolant to the radiator to bring it back up to the bottom of the filler neck. And then close the radiator off. And then don't forget to refill the reservoir up to the appropriate level, because it was emptied during our draining. And then close that up as well, and run the car again and check for any leaks. I think that's a wrap. Thanks very much for watching. I hope that this video was helpful to you and maybe helped you do something that you've never done before. I just want to mention the website www.PreludeDriver.com that produced this video. It's a great place for people of all skill levels to come and talk about Honda Preludes and how to maintain them. As a site, we're really committed to just helping people keep these great cars on the road, and so if you have any questions about this video or anything about these cars for that matter, come on over. Membership to post on the forum is free, and there's lots of people there that are really willing to help, and we don't mind having new people that are new to auto mechanics. If you feel that you're a noob and want some help, don't be afraid to come by and ask us your questions. So thank you again for watching, and drive safely. And if this video has helped you a little bit, maybe it might have even saved you from taking your car into the shop. PreludeDriver.com is run by volunteers and funded out of volunteers' pockets, and so we appreciate your donations. If maybe this video helped you save a couple bucks, if you could pass some of that on to us, we'd greatly appreciate it. There's a donation button on the PreludeDriver.com site. Thanks again, and drive safely.